Welcome to Dreaming the Light. I'm Joanna, your guide on this transformative dream journey. In this podcast, we will explore the world of dreams, sleep, and rest, uncovering their remarkable healing potential, even in the most challenging times. Discover practical tools to navigate nightmares, anxiety, and trauma-related sleep issues, as we embark together on a quest to unlock the healing power of your dreams. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today with Dr. Leslie Ellis, a recognized clinician, counselor, and author with over 2 decades of expertise in focusing oriented therapy. I've been following Dr. Leslie for many years myself because I'm really interested in her research on nightmares and on the time she spent to bring dream work and nightmare therapy into the healthcare, into the rooms of the therapists and healers that are not always so skilled to deal with nightmares. And in our conversation today, we'll delve into some practical strategies for effectively addressing nightmares, some of them based on her protocol, nightmare treatment protocol that she has developed. So welcome, Leslie. Thank you for being here today. And before we dive deep into the practical part of treating nightmares, could you tell us a little bit about why did you choose this path of nightmare research?
So it was because I was practicing for about 20 years, and I was working in trauma and just, as a therapist, I think every so often we just need to refill the well. And so I went back to school and did my doctoral degree, and I really have used dreams as an integral part of my practice since the beginning, because that was part of my initial training. And so I wanted to do my doctoral research on something dream related and practical and helpful. And nightmares are one of the, kinds of dreams that actually show up as a clinical problem. And what I discovered is that there's very little nightmare treatment information. And at the time, I wasn't even aware of imagery rehearsal therapy. I don't think it was developed yet when I was first doing it. So it's interesting that I came up with something quite similar, and mostly because of my Jungian background, the Jungian idea of dreaming the dream forward, which we'll talk about a bit. So I just wanted to do some dream research, and I've chose nightmares. And also, at the same time, I was training people in focusing for work with trauma. And I was working with a clinic in Vancouver that's was specific focus was treating refugees. And the clinical director told me, if they had one symptom that they could get help with, it would be nightmares. If you could just fix one thing, this would be the main thing. So there was a really clear need, and they were willing to be a site for my research. And so all of those reasons are why I chose it.
Yeah. That's really totally makes sense, because people that struggle with many problems with post-traumatic stress disorder, they often have those nightmares, right? Could you explain a little bit? Yeah. Could you explain a little bit like the relation between stress and trauma and nightmares? Like what exactly happened that we start to develop the nightmares?
So that's a very big question, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, but I'll try to really summarize it, because lately what I've been thinking about is basically how trauma gets embedded in our bodies and our nervous system. And so I did a paper this year, it took me a couple of years to write, about nightmares and the nervous system, and how when our nervous system, it basically stores reactions to experiences. And if we have a lot of difficult experiences, then they're sort of embedded in our bodies. And when we're dreaming and sleeping, these surface. And so, especially early trauma, it becomes a patterning. And so the dreams will come. And I think the dreams are not actually trying to scare us. I think they're really trying to metabolize the emotion. And sometimes it's just too much. If someone's experienced a lot of adversity, the dreams are difficult, and it's not enough just to have these dreams, and the dreams do their job and the emotion attenuates, which will happen in normal dreaming. But when it's too much trauma, then the dreams become repetitive and they become traumatizing in themselves. And there's this vicious cycle that happens, which is what happens in post-traumatic stress. And so then I think people need help and the help is just not very prevalent out there. Very few clinicians actually have this training. And so I'm really glad you're asking me about it, because I love opportunities to talk about this.
Yes, again, I think it's so important because I believe there are still many false or outdated beliefs about dreams and nightmares, and many people still believe that they mean nothing, you know. But if you look into the science, the 21st century, you can see that actually there's a lot of research on how dreams are very important, actually. And as you said, it's our way of processing our emotions and the stress that we experience during the day, and it comes in the dreams. And I also believe that dreams have the capacity to help us process a lot of things. But when we experience very traumatic events, or if we are exposed to a very high level of stress for a long time, they may not be able to process this in a way that it will not show up in this very, very scary images during our sleep. And as you said, it's a cycle, because many times a person is living very complicated circumstances, and then they go to sleep, and the last thing they want is to have a nightmare, because maybe the sleeping time can be getting some relief from what's going on during the waking state, and then the nightmare comes, and then you just basically reliving it the day and the night. And that's why I think it's so important for people to know that you actually can do something about it, that actually there are ways to help process and integrate the nightmares. And if you would like to share a little bit more about the nightmare treatment protocol that you worked on. And I know that there are several steps to it, so maybe we could go over the steps. And could you give some background of why each step is important and how we can apply it when we want to look into our nightmares? And one last thing before you start is that I know that your work, many of the work that you did and programs and courses, it's for clinicians. But if we're considering that a person maybe not be able to receive professional therapeutic help at the moment, or it's so overwhelmed that this is just out of the question, they can still do something about it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that was one of the first things I discovered about this protocol, is that people started, in my initial study, started doing it for themselves when they woke up from a nightmare, and they felt empowered by that. Like, oh my goodness, I had no idea that there was something I can do. So it's a really helpful, really series of steps for anybody. And I've since done a lot of work to put the courses out there. And I've been getting feedback from psychologists and counselors who've given this to their patients, and their patients are saying, it takes me so much less time to settle and go back to sleep. And there's such a gratitude for it. So I can see that it is actually a very good self-help tool, even though that wasn't the original intention. It's certainly worth trying, because what I've found in my work and in all the studies I've looked at is that it usually helps. And if it doesn't hurt. It's going to either maybe not make a huge difference, or it can make a tremendous one, but it doesn't create more problems. It actually helps people feel more in control of their dreaming lives. So I'm really happy to share it for anybody.
That's really reassuring.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Don't
it's
be
really
afraid.
important to say, exactly, don't be afraid to try it by yourself if you don't have anyone else to help you with that, because it cannot harm you. So that's very reassuring. Thank you for saying that.
Mm-hmm. So the first step is really, and this is for when you wake up in the night for a nightmare. I think that's probably the most helpful piece, is when you're awoken by a very scary dream. You don't have your therapist there anyway, so you are kind of on your own with it. And the first thing to do is to just orient yourself, because what happens if you wake up from a nightmare, they're very vivid and it feels true when it's happening. So the first thing it's really important is just to notice, okay, I'm not in that dream scenario. Although it's tricky if you still are in a difficult scenario, so it's harder to separate. But you notice that you're in your bed, you've been sleeping, so you're in a relatively safe place. It depends, of course, on the person and where they are, but to notice that you're relatively safe in that moment, and look around and orient yourself so that you notice that you're not actually in that dream, whatever that dream was. And to wait until your body calms down before you start this process, because our ideas and our where we go in our imagination is very state dependent. So if we're completely aroused and frightened, we're going to imagine frightening scenarios. And we're
Yeah.
talking about in a minute dreaming the dream forward, but we want to start with making sure that we set it up so it's most likely to be something constructive or helpful. And so when you first wake up from a nightmare, I would say to people, just notice you're in your bedroom or in your bed and you're safe in that moment, and your heart might be racing and you might have a lot of physiological activation. So start by just calming down. And one of the ways to calm down, and a simple one that regulates your nervous system, is to breathe slowly and have your out breath be longer than your in breath. And that activates the parasympathetic nervous system. So it's naturally calming to the body to just take like 10 breaths and count maybe 4 in and a count of 6 out, just to slow your breathing and extend your out breath. This is why singing is actually so regulating, because singing automatically does
Yeah,
that, where you
the
take
out
a
breath
quick
it's
breath
much longer. That's true.
in.
Yeah, yeah, it makes total sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the first thing. Actually, singing in a choir is the best, because then you're in the presence of others and you're regulated, and it's got all of the helpful things that you're looking for. But in this case, just calm your body. Take the time to feel as calm as you can be, and then you want to turn toward the dream, especially if it's a dream that you keep having. It's really helpful to imagine it forward or change it in some way so that you have created a pathway for the dream to go. And this, in my clinical practice, when I've done this with dreams, it's always changed them in some way. It's always made it different. And sometimes these dreams just stop after this process. And so it's worth a try. So starting with a calm body, what I like to do is have someone imagine into the dreamscape and see if there's anything within the dream itself that's helpful. And there may or may not be, but that's a good place to look, because if you have this dream again and there are some allies or helpful elements in the dream, they're available to you right from within the dream. So if there's a friend with you or somebody who's bigger and stronger and you can recruit to help you, or if there's, anything from nature, nature is often very helpful. I would say just look around, because even in a difficult dream,
Yeah.
there's often glimmers of help. And if you focus on those, you can pick them up as resources. And so that's the place I would start with in this dream, is to see if there's anything helpful in the dream.
Yeah.
And if not, before I invite people to dream the dream forward, if they're really stressed and their dreams are really difficult, is to pick up something helpful from their imagination or from their life. So if there's nothing in the dream that looks like it's going to be a source of help, imagine who or what character or what kind of protection you want to have with you as you go forward. So it could be anything, because it's a dream. It could be anything. You could pick a superhero from your childhood. You could choose a superpower that you have, an ability to disappear or to fly or escape or fight. Really, it's best if the person's imagination chooses. And
Yeah.
so it's a something from focusing called finding help. And I've really made a lot of this for working with nightmares, of picking up some resources before you go forward into the dream. And then when you have a sense of what could be helpful from your dream or from your imagination, then to spend a bit of time imagining fully that that help is with you, and feeling in your body what that's like to have that help with you. Because the more we embody this, the more it will stay with you even when you're sleeping. It's best if it's not just an idea, but an actual experience. And so, yeah, to just take the time to pick up some resources. You could even pick up a few if you want to. If there's more help, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
That's true. Yeah. There's no limits to that.
No. And sometimes that is enough, honestly, because that changes the dream already, to focus on what's helpful in it. But you can also take it a step further and then go to the place. You don't have to relive the whole scary dream, but you can go to the place where you would like to begin to change it. And sometimes in a nightmare, there's a crux point where things turn badly, or there's a place that you just wake up in the middle of the worst place. That's very common. So you can just start right from there. You don't need to relive the whole dream, especially if it's a really scary one. It's probably better not to, but to go into the dream experientially right at the point where you want to change it, and sort of dip into it, not too deeply, but go there and imagine it forward. Imagine your all of your allies with you that you've conjured. Imagine being in a calm body, and then just let your imagination carry it forward really spontaneously. This part you don't have to be so scripted about. You can just let it flow. So once you have all that set up, just go, where does this dream go next? And the thing about people with a trauma history, even people who've experienced very difficult scenarios, like I worked with a lot of people with early childhood trauma, sexual abuse, those kinds of things. And as terrible as their experiences are, they do end, and their lives do go forward. And sometimes in PTSD, what happens is that the person's body gets stuck in the place where it happened, and it doesn't feel like life has moved on. And so imagining that life has moved forward from this place is important for getting your whole body really to understand that this particular dream, this image, it's over, it's in the past, and something else happened that got you to where you are right now, which is to a safe enough place to sleep. So a safe enough place, and sometimes a very different place. And so I would just say, imagine it forward and let it carry forward in whatever way it wants to. And once you've got a calm body and you've picked up some resources, the chances are good that it will go forward in a constructive way. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It's really not about that. It's not about imagining world peace or something like that. It's not doesn't have to be dramatically great. It just needs to go forward. And I think that what happens is that after that, people's dreams change because you've just given it a pathway. And so it doesn't get stuck in the same place. I was just going to say, that's essentially it. It's very simple. It's actually not a difficult protocol to do by yourself or with a therapist. It's really as simple as imagining a new dream ending. And this idea has been studied quite extensively in the context of imagery rehearsal therapy, which is a cognitive behavioral approach, but includes this piece of rescripting your dream ending. So the rescripting idea actually originates with Jung. I always like to say that because in the imagery rehearsal therapy literature, they don't mention that. And Jung was the first who came up with the idea clinically of dreaming the dream onward. And his idea was mainly to stimulate your imagination and really to go deeper into your dreams. And it's also helpful practice for people who have post-traumatic stress, because it seems as though one of the symptoms as well that I've been really curious about is that it actually seems to cut off a person's ability to imagine forward. They tend to not be able to imagine a future, or to their creativity and ability to project into the future is really curtailed. So this can help with that as well, to project yourself forward. So it has this other helpful quality, but mainly what it does is it reduces the distress that nightmares cause. It reduces the frequency of nightmares, and it seems to also reduce the symptoms of post-trauma quite significantly for a lot of people. Like in my study, which was very small, I measured their post-traumatic stress symptoms before and after, and they were reduced by half just from this. And they were already in therapy, so it wasn't from the therapy. It was from this. It seemed to be from this intervention because their dreams changed. So it's powerful.
Of course. That's very powerful because, as we said before, the sleeping and the resting and the dreaming, when it's traumatizing us on top of what we already been traumatized with or the circumstances we are living, it's really become unbearable. And what you said about this, rewriting the dream, it's kind of waking up your imagination, or even this hope of different possibility, and that it also can apply actually for your waking life. It's very powerful because what you says, it really resonates with me. When something terrible happened to you, to your family, to your country, you may feel like there is no future, like you can't imagine, like you can't move on. And maybe imagining, different scenarios or better future, it can be very, very challenging. But if we can do it with our dream, as you said, if we can just make it move forward, as you said, doesn't need to be perfect. I think it's very important, because maybe not every person will be able to imagine it in a way that, like you said, the world peace, or suddenly all my problems are gone. Maybe that's not about it, but about moving this energy in the dream into something else, into something better, that has more light. I don't know, we can call it many names, but that's really incredible. Do you know?
I want to pick up on that once before, hold your question, but I wanted to
Yes.
pick up on that notion of hope, because I from all the literature I've read, there's also this very alarming link between frequent nightmares and suicide risk. It's a dramatic link that shows it's far more likely that someone will attempt or reattempt suicide if they're having frequent nightmares. And one of the challenges, I think, when people are at that level of desperation is that they lack hope that there's a brighter future. And so this process can really instill hope. And part of, if you're working with people, that helping people with their dreams, it's really good to say that this is helpful. It's helped so many people. It generally works, and instill this positive expectation, because when you haven't, like you're alluding to, no relief from your stress during the day, and then during the night you're plagued with the same kind of stresses, it does feel hopeless. And there is so much you can do about your nightmares, and so they're not something you have to endure. You can really do something about it. And I want to stress that, because part of the reason it feels hopeless is that many people don't know that there's anything they can do about their dreams. They just feel like they're need to be a victim of them. And it's really quite easy to meddle with them, to go in and change them and think about them. And it's amazing how fluidly they respond to this. So there is hope. And another thing I wanted to mention is, even in the darkest of trauma histories, like there's been studies by a Polish researcher on the dreams of people that were in Auschwitz and survived Auschwitz. And even he said even their dreams were helpful and healing, and moved toward more hopefulness over time. And so if that's true, if somebody can suffer the worst, I would imagine that to be one of the absolute worst kinds of trauma you could experience, and their dreams are helpful and hopeful ultimately, then I think there's hope for us in any situation.
Yes, that's again really encouraging. And as you said, trying this method doesn't take much. I mean, only the willingness and some time, maybe when you're lying already in the bed, or maybe when you woke up in the morning, to do that. I wanted to ask two things. You don't need to write it down, or is there any correlation between writing maybe the different scenario of the dream and the effectiveness of this protocol, or it can be just done in our imagination, in our head, in our body?
I don't really know if they've specifically researched that, but the imagery rehearsal, or IRT protocol, is the one that's most studied. And part of their protocol is to write it down. And so it certainly doesn't hurt to write it down. Anything that you can do to reinforce it actually will help, to reinforce the new dream ending. And so for children, for example, I suggest that they draw a picture of the new dream, or they draw, a little bit of their dream, and then all of the helpful elements that they want to bring in, and then an image of what it looks like when they do that. And draw imagery and dreams are they're quite close cousins. So you can also draw a picture of the new dream. Also, imagining it richly, I think, is really helpful. But writing it down, and then also rehearsing it before you sleep. This is also part of imagery rehearsal, but really embedding it in your mind before you sleep is what they suggest. And I think the thing I like to add is this experiential element, where you really imagine that you're in this new scenario that feels like it moves forward from where your dream was. Because when you have it as an experience, I think it's more available to you when you're dreaming, because in dreaming, our mind and our our sort of prefrontal cortex, our executive functioning, is quite dampened down. We don't necessarily think well in our dreams. So, but we do feel, and we do have access to our physical sensations and emotions. And so I feel like that whatever you do to reinforce it, that also feels like it becomes a part of your experience, the more likely that will infiltrate your dreams.
Yeah, that's really great answer. And actually, you kind of answer already another question I had about children. Would you recommend this method? I mean, obviously it would be modified depending on the age of the child and, you know, their capabilities, but it is also something that parents could do with their children if they're waking up with bad nightmares, is to talk about it and maybe try to find those allies and draw it, as you mentioned. Is there anything else that you would say specifically for children could work well?
Yeah, I think, what I've noticed about children and their nightmares is that they often will do this. They will often automatically do this. Their imagination is so vibrant and vital that they're just more inherently likely to just imagine into their dreams. So suggesting that they do this is kind of natural for them. And I wouldn't go back into the nightmare so much, but I would ask them, who would you like to have in that dream? Who would you like to have help you? And get them to come up with heroic figures and invite them to include that person in their dream. And they seem also more able to go back into the dream when they're sleeping. And so you could say, so when you have this dream, bring Superman or whatever your favorite hero is into the dream, or your own superpowers. I would really reinforce the ways that they could change it in a very imaginative and playful way, so that it feels like they have all kinds of ideas about what they can do. And I wouldn't minimize their fears or their nightmares either. They are going to be representing some fears and some anxiety. So, I mean, although I wouldn't suggest going deeply into the dream, I would take some time to comfort and calm them down and listen to what they're worried about, because the dreams are a reflection of something that's worrying them. So it's not like you gloss over that. You want to just, really express care and sympathy and understanding, and then offer this way forward for kids.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And what you said about the kids' imagination, it's so much more developed. We kind of lose it when we grow up, and actually it can come naturally to them to find those monsters or to find those allies in their dreams. So I think it's an amazing tip for parents and should feel pretty effortless to implement. And the drawing part, it sounds extremely useful. And I would like to maybe ask you a last question about prevention of nightmares during a very stressful time. So is there anything, or you have some suggestions or tools or whatever it is that you could say, okay, when you're already having nightmares, well, we cover what you can do by yourself or with a friend. I also think we didn't mention that, but I also think that sharing those nightmares, those dreams with your close people, it's very important and also very healing in itself. But is there anything that we can do during very stressful times to actually prevent the nightmares from happening in the first place?
Yeah, one of the things is we tend to dream about the things that we repress or the things that we don't want to look at or talk about. And so even though it's difficult, yes, talking about your dreams with somebody is really helpful, or just talking about your fears and concerns, not just trying to imagine that if you don't talk about them that they're going to go away, because they won't. And there's also this idea sometimes that talking about them might make them worse. But in fact, always talking about difficult things, especially with a friend or a therapist or someone who feels safe and compassionate, is going to make a difference, because it shares the burden and it isn't just you alone with it. So I would say that, and if you don't have someone to talk to all the time, which we don't always have, journaling is a very good therapeutic kind of option as well, because it's not quite the same as just rambling around inside your head. You can actually write something down, and there's a little bit of a dialogue that happens. And so it's a way of almost like talking it out with someone, a little bit toward that end. And the other thing you can do is to try and regulate your nervous system, because when your nervous system is really charged, it will be reflected in your dreams. And so whatever kinds of things you can do that are calming and soothing, especially before sleeping, yoga, music, not, and the opposite, don't, go and watch the news if it's a difficult time.
It's a big problem nowadays.
Yeah, right before sleep, it's best to not have really any screen time, because it messes up with your circadian rhythm to have all that bright light. And it's also better to have your nighttime period kind of wind down peacefully, no matter what's going on during the day, to try and have the pre-sleep hour before sleep be a sort of a winding down, and where things are sort of slowing down and soothing and quiet, and trying to be calm and peaceful before you sleep as much as you can, given whatever situation you're in.
Yeah, that's very good advice. Trying to process what is actually happening to you instead of having resistance or muting it. Because what happened many times is when we don't want to look at something, then we dream about it. So this way or that way, we're going to meet this thing somewhere. So maybe it's better to meet it when we are with ourselves, with our journal, with our therapist, instead of having a nightmare and meeting it this way. Because I find it very true that everything that we try to suppress, it comes in our dreams. And when we are living very complicated circumstances, there's a lot of things. And some of them, maybe we don't even have mental capacity to process during the day, which is fine. But I also think that the more we are honest with ourselves about what's going on with us, and we use those tools, as you mentioned, like movement, yoga, music, not exposing to too much news, which I think is very detrimental to our mental health and sleep, but not to just mute, not to, suppress what's really happening, but to transform it into something else, can also help us to avoid or have less nightmares, right?
So beautifully put. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. So, Leslie, could you tell us where we can find more information about your work, your book, your courses, everything that you offer? So if someone feels like they want to read some articles, they want to get in touch with you, where can they do that?
Yeah, I have quite a few free resources and articles. And then I've also got courses for clinicians and nightmare treatment protocols, a whole wealth of information. And the best place is probably my website, which is drleslieellis.com, and it's spelled DRLESLIEELLIS.com. And you can also contact me through my website, and I'm happy to hear from people. So I like to share these resources because I really feel like there's a very great need and a lot of people who don't know that there's really something you can do about your nightmares.
Yes, that's so true. I'm going to add the link to your website and some of your resources in the description of this video and this audio file. And of course, I hope that whoever is looking for more information can reach out to you. And I just wanted to say thank you for having this conversation with me and bringing this important subject and the hope. And I hope that we can leave the listeners with the feeling of hope that, yes, there is something we can do. And it's not that hard. I mean, it is hard, but it's not that hard, and it doesn't require much, and that this can change, that dreams can change, the nightmares can change.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me and for the opportunity to share this really important information. And I agree, it's hopeful. I mean, the process is not difficult. The circumstances might be, but the process itself is not difficult.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I really hope that you enjoyed this show. If you did, please consider giving it a like and maybe leaving a review. And most importantly, feel free to share it with your family and friends. For more information about my work and projects, you can check out my website www.bluelotusqueendom.com.